Hey guys, I was cleaning out my closet and I found this picture of myself. I'm about 9 years old in this photograph wearing my favorite little painter's smock, and it reminded me of an exercise that I learned from my all time favorite book that changed my whole life, and that's this one. This is Lisa Nichols and her Abundance Now. And she has an exercise in this book where she challenges us to go back and visit some stories and some lessons that we learned in our childhood that may have led us in the wrong direction in terms of our beliefs about money. And it might be time to challenge them and eventually heal them, which we'll get to later in this video. There's some sentences that we heard or experiences that we had in our youth that really did create a template for our future experiences. And some of these sentences that she states might sound familiar to you guys, yeah? Money doesn't grow on trees. We've all heard that one. The rich will always get richer, the poor always get poorer. Save your allowance because there's no more where that came from. Rich people get money by scamming the rest of us. If you're rich, you can't be conscious or spiritual or ecologically aware. Basically, money is the root of all evil. And life is hard, and the little guy never gets a break. And I look back as a result of having read this book, and I had to reimagine all of the things that were told to me that may not have been quite so true, that in fact might have been quite toxic. And I had to go back and reevaluate them. In my youth, they didn't come to me in sentences like this. They came to me in stories, scenarios. And so this is story time for me. So I'm going to go back and share with you guys what my experience was like growing up as a little girl in the South Bronx in New York City. And I have this incredible hardworking mother who was a nurse. And I had my father who was sadly an alcoholic and a drug addict who did not have a job. And my brother, and he was, my big brother. And so there we are, two kids, two parents, and a pretty hellish environment growing up. Yeah. My father would beat us all up and would beat my mother and take her money and use it to buy alcohol and use it to buy drugs. And there were a lot of things I learned about the scarcity principle growing up in that environment. There's never enough. Whatever you have, you're likely to lose. And this was illustrated to me in a very, very, very personal story. I call it the jar of quarters. My mother would give me money for doing chores around the house. That was kind of how I earned my allowance. And I asked her if she minded to give it to me in the form of quarters instead of dollars. The dollars were awesome. They were papery and they were kind of ugly. And the quarters were just so pretty. And I'm like 9 or 7 or something. What do I know? Just pretty, pretty stuff. And so she said, sure. And she's giving me the money in quarters and I'm putting them in my little jar. And I'm just watching like every week. The jars go higher, the quarters get bigger and bigger and bigger, pile gets higher and higher and higher. And I have this gigantic mason jar and it's just full of these shiny bright quarters. And it was so beautiful. I would actually like just look at it every day, mesmerized by just how beautiful it was. And I kept it in the top drawer of the dresser that I shared with my big brother. It was a little high for me, but I could peek over and I could see all my quarters. Until the day that I pulled the drawer open, I peeked my little nose over, looked inside, and saw the jar with nothing in it. It was completely empty. Every quarter was gone. And I was devastated. My little 7 to 9 year old heart just split in two. And at that moment, you would think, well, I would do something. I would go to my mother and tell her my quarters were gone. Or I would tell my father. Or I would tell my brother. And I didn't. I just closed the drawer and I walked away. Because I had learned something that there was no point. I couldn't tell my brother. He's my big brother. He just punched me. I couldn't tell my mother if she took those quarters. She took them because she needed them. Because I could see, even at that young age, that she was the only hand holding the whole family afloat. I couldn't ask for them back. I knew how much she needed them. And I couldn't ask my father. I don't know what he would do. He was volatile and impossible to guess. And so all I could do was what I did, which is just walk away and then take into my future Too many lessons that I learned that I shouldn't have. Too many little scars that now finally need to be healed for me to be able to move forward and reflect my true, natural, prosperous state. And so Lisa Nichols has an exercise that she's very famous for, actually, and it shows up in this book as well, and it's called Erasing the Lies. And so for us to figure out where the lies are, the first thing I got to do is I got to get my story straight. I got to look and really, really, really get the story deeply ingrained and clear in my mind and my heart. So the first step, I believe, is just write down the story. Yeah, before we even get to erase the lies, just write down the story. Pen on paper has this kind of deeply sort of, I don't know, tactile quality that I think is much more personal than typing. And so I would recommend it. And if even writing feels weird, you can talk into your device or just record it and then transcribe what you said, because speaking also really helps bring the inside out. And once you've got the story, scan through it and see if you can find any unifying principles in the story that merit question. And if I do the same thing, yeah, with the story that I just shared with you guys, and I look and see what I learned, funny enough, the first false lesson that I learned was the only way to make money is through manual labor. And that is not true. It's a way to make money, but it's not the only one. And in a universe that is full and prosperous and abundant, there are myriad ways to make money, one of which is allowing your money to make money. And as a person who grew up in the world that I did, I didn't even fathom the possibility of being able to invest. It just seemed like it was something that was for other people, people that didn't look like me, people that didn't live like me, people that didn't grow up like me. And it took me an entire lifetime to erase that lie and finally start investing. The next lie that I learned is if I have anything, others will always take it away. And that sentence is false. What is false about it? Because sometimes, you have things and you lose things, but there's something inherently false about that statement, and that is will always. And that's not true. Sometimes it happens, but there's a big difference between sometimes and will always. And this is probably the lesson from this that I learned that got me in the most trouble, because I was terrified, yes, to have anything. Because if I acquired anything, someone, a spouse, or the government, or the student loan people, someone was going to come and take it all away. And so the only recourse I had was just to spend it real quick so that they wouldn't take it. And I ended up exactly where I ended up, in this horrible spiral, ever sinking down into insanity. And it was all based on this one false belief that I had to eradicate. As I'm looking down at my notes, another, probably the most dangerous lesson of all, is that I'm helpless. I'm a victim and there's nothing I can do. And that is the most profoundly false thing I've said so far. It is false for me, it is false for you. We are powerful creatures endowed and destined for great, big, beautiful things that reflect our great, big, beautiful hearts. It is deeply and inherently false. And in this Lisa Nichols exercise, Erasing the Lies, once you have a vision of what those lessons were and how not true they are, you write them down. Again, we're writing because it's got that connective quality. You write down the lie and you erase it in red ink. And then underneath it, you write what is actually true and return to it and read it again and again. Because just when you think you got it, it will slip away. You have to come back. If you are living a great full life, those beliefs will be challenged over and over and over again. So these exercises are important, and I'm still continuing to grow and learn by doing them. Highly recommend them for you guys because I think that they're very, very, very healing. There's a little bonus tip that I want to share with you guys, and that is the fact that not every lesson that was learned in my childhood around money, abundance, and prosperity was false. There are some things that were very, very true, and they merit being remembered with more, I don't know, intensity than I sometimes allow them. I remember when my mother, bless her heart, finally got us away from my father. She really did, bless her heart. She just ran one day. She just took one kid in one hand, one kid in the stroller, just headed down the 6 floors of the 6-story tenement we lived in the South Bronx, and just kept running. Just kept running until we turned 18 and my father had no legal claim over us. That alone was a powerful lesson, in truth. Yeah. And we moved into a place that was not so pretty. And there was a gigantic hole in the wall that she did not have resources to fix. So what did she do? She took her easel and her paintbrushes and her canvas, and she painted this beautiful still life and hung it over the hole in the wall. And it reminds me of the Arthur Ashe quote: start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. We didn't have much, but we had creativity and we were resourceful. And she taught me in that moment that deep inside, I have enough. We have enough to make one small change for the better for ourselves and our families, which can lead to the next change, lead to the next change, and eventually lead to a generation that is sitting and asking these very same questions. Another really beautiful story, I think, was from my grandmother. My grandmother was one of those like matrons in white, at the Baptist church that took up an entire city block in Harlem, New York. And so the church was the center of her life. And we're living with my grandparents to escape my father. And so we're going to church with my grandmother. And we're running late. She was probably having some trouble, hot combing the tangles out of my hair. So we were running late for church. And we get into a taxi cab and off we go. And I'm looking up and I remember this. I'm looking because I'm so tiny. I'm looking up at her in the taxi cab, and it comes time for us to pay the bill. And she hands over the dollar to the cab driver, and it blew out of the window. And I looked up at my grandmother. I was terrified because I had learned, when it comes to money, be afraid because you will lose it. Yes? And I look at her with my little heart fluttering like a bird in my chest. And my grandmother looks at me and she says the most profound, beautiful, magical thing. Well, I guess somebody must have needed that dollar. So a sentence like that stopped me in my little tracks, and it connected me to a thing that is absolutely true, which is we are in this endless flow of abundance. And we're not just players in this game, we are crucial components of this flow. That somebody out there who needed that dollar, my grandmother was the vehicle for them. She needed to be there in that moment. I needed to be there to witness it, because we're all part of the flow that returns in a cycle and brings abundance back to us. Endless, limitless, and never ending. And I cannot find words to express how grateful I am to have learned that truth. So, as you look back over your experience and you make a note of what was false and you erase it and you replace it with the truth, and you look back at what is true and you trumpet it to make sure you never forget it. The next step for me was just surrounding myself with it, because we get so many negative images. I wanted to drown them out and replace them with the truth. And so I hung signs all over my apartment. I actually have this thing I call my wall of words. Wherever there's a quote that really feels resonant to me about these universal truths, I use Canva or a computer, and I will print out the quote and I'll frame it. And here's an example just on my wall of words. And every time I pass the wall, or I look at a piece of art, or I look at a pillow on my sofa, or a coffee mug, or a paperweight, or anywhere that I can place this thought to continue to remind myself of what is true, slowly starts to reprogram me from those false, damaging, traumatic messages I learned in a pretty traumatic childhood, and replacing them with truth that is inexorable, truth that never changes, truth that cannot be argued. For me or for you, we are powerful, we are beautiful, and we are born into a natural flow of abundance that cannot be stopped. Thank you so much for letting me share, and I'm so grateful to spend this time with you. and looking forward to seeing you soon.